September 19th, 1796. The Philadelphia Daily American Advertisers printed George Washington's farewell address. So yes, that is the history lesson today. It's the George Washington farewell address. Arguably one of technically our only nonpartisan president, right? He was not a member of any political party. In fact, he used this farewell address to warn against political parties. I guess I would argue that if the closest thing we had to an independent president since George Washington is probably Dwight Eisenhower. And they both shared a title before they became president, didn't they? Essentially, general of our armed forces, right? So perhaps there's a pattern here, right? It's these are two men who ultimately only had to see everybody as Americans first, not as Democrats or Republicans, then Americans, right? Democratic Americans, Republican Americans, no, Americans. So a few things about his farewell address, a few little history nuggets, by the way. The U.S. Senate on Washington's birthday still has a senator read Washington's farewell address, and it's written in some older English, meaning it doesn't necessarily translate as easily today. So while I will give you a few quotes, I will give you a more modern interpretation of said quote. So there's a few themes you should know about his farewell address, right? The number one thing he was preaching was unity above all else. In fact, it was the central warning that Washington made in his address, is that America's strength depends on national unity. He feared factions, especially factions built on geography. At the time, it was North versus South, or identity. We were having new Americans come over. Which part of Europe were you from, etc. He feared that was going to tear the republic apart. This is in 1796. Today's culture war politics, our red-blue state divides, right? Our regional polarization, they kind of echo that concern and then some, right? His prescription was Americans must see themselves as Americans first, not America first, but as Americans first, not as members of warring camps. So he wrote, "The unity of government which constitutes you one people is also now dear to you. It is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. Indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts. Please don't fragment the country. Please don't factionalize us." You see where he was going. He also gave a warning he had issued on the dangers of partisanship. He called the spirit of party democracy's worst enemy, predicting that it would lead to cycles of revenge, government paralysis, foreign manipulation, and eventually despotism. Is this familiar? The dysfunction of modern U.S. politics, the weaponization of investigations, tit-for-tat impeachments, shutdown brinksmanship. Once again, our founding father, pretty prescient on this one. His advice was to discourage and restrain partisanship. Talk about a warning that was unheeded. Let me read you a quote here. "I have already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations, i.e. North versus South. Let me now warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, is itself a frightful despotism." That essentially the end state of partisanship gets you much closer to authoritarianism than you realize. He continues. It serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, and opens the door to foreign influence and corruption. He didn't even know about the algorithms yet in 1796. And he knew that foreign actors would be using bots or TikTok or something else to stir division in this country to weaken us. Washington knew then. He also called for respecting our institutions. Washington insisted that respect for the Constitution, laws, and the separation of powers was the bedrock of liberty. Here's what he wrote. Respect for its authority, compliance with its laws, acquiescence in its measures are duties enjoined by the fundamental maxims of true liberty. The basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. But the Constitution, which at any time exists, is sacredly obligatory upon all. Follow the Constitution. And when you're doing something unconstitutional, that is un-American, and it is against the rest of us. By the way, he also called for fiscal responsibility. He stressed that public credit was a national treasure, urging Americans to avoid excessive debt, to accept that taxes are necessary, and to think of posterity. In an era of ballooning deficits and polarized tax debates, wow. Washington's sober call for balancing prudence with preparation is a reminder of the stakes. Here's what he wrote. As a very important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. One method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible, avoiding likewise the accumulation of debt, not ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burden with which ourselves ought to bear. Don't pass the debt down to me or to my kids or to their kids. There was also some hat tips to morality and knowledge. He said, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and to cherish them. Virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. Now, some people will say that this means it has to be a specific religious or a specific set of morals. We are a country that was founded on a freedom of religion, which also means a freedom not to be religious. But it didn't mean we didn't want to have moral men and women serving in this country and that morality. And I do fear that we have lost some way. I mean, we have got to figure out how to, and again, this gets it to my quote from Milton Friedman in the first part of my monologue today, which is we need better incentives if you want people to behave with some sense of good morality when they're in office. On foreign policy, many of you know this one. He warned against entangling alliances. This is probably the biggest takeaway. He said Washington's most famous foreign policy warning was to avoid permanent alliances. Here's what he wrote. Observe good faith and justice toward all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Nothing is more essential than that permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded. Don't fall in love with one nation. Don't let hatred of another lead you down a stupid policy path. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. Well, we've gone back and forth, right, on this one. I think that we had a pretty good 80-year run when we had a like-minded view with other democracy-loving nations forming NATO. So I wonder what Washington would think of NATO and whether he would still disagree with it. So that's an interesting. I think that's an interesting thing that we would love to find out. What would Washington have thought of NATO? Now he would have to then know that America was the most powerful country on earth, and of course, when he died, it was still the country. The most powerful country was not us at that time. It was the country that we revolted against. But anyway, there's your history lesson today. I think the Washington farewell address, his warning about parties, his concern about factionalism, his concern about what happens when unity is lost. Boy, I found it to be an elixir when I was doing it. Again, this is, in case you're wondering, I go through all sorts of there's all these different history websites that have put together this day in history, this week in history, and all this stuff. So I do it for this specific window. And let's just say, when you see it, you're like, aha! The timing is perfect.